34 and single, die alone, childless, such a waste. My sister mocked at the family reunion dinner. Mom nodded. What a shame. I smiled as the restaurant doors swung open. My tech mogul husband strode in with our 5-year-old twins. Sis's jaw dropped when he said the 3 words that sealed their fate. She owns this. The chill in the air of the private dining room at the Bristol in Chicago had nothing to do with the Midwest January winds howling outside. It was entirely generated by the venom dripping from my sister Sarah's perfectly manicured lips. This annual Reed family reunion, always held during the bleak post-holiday slump when everyone was simultaneously bloated with rich food and drained of holiday spirit, was less about kinship and more about cataloging who was winning the elaborate decades-long social game my parents orchestrated. By their narrow suburban standards, I, Evelyn Evie Reed, was definitively losing. I was 34, professionally successful, in a way they couldn't even grasp, having moved from Wall Street compliance to the cutting edge of legal tech strategy, but crucially, I was unattached in their eyes, lacking the easily visible trappings of domestic bliss they valued. The table was laden with classic American comfort food, a beautiful, overpriced spread of smoked brisket, artisanal mac and cheese, and a towering apple pie from a famous local bakery, all of which was about to be ruined by a single, carefully targeted verbal assassination that was as predictable as the changing of the seasons. Sarah, 2 years younger than me but perpetually condescending, leaned in, her diamond-studded wrist flashing under the enormous antique brass chandelier. Her husband Michael, a bland commercial real estate agent whose entire personality seemed to be confined to his ill-fitting golf polos, chuckled obediently beside her. "Evie, seriously," she purred, drawing out the name like a critique of my very existence. "It's beyond tragic. 34. All that schooling, a degree from an Ivy League, no less, that big-shot job in compliance. Which I still maintain means filing paperwork and telling people no, and yet no life. No husband, no kids. Just a tiny, cramped condo in Boston where you spend all your time looking at spreadsheets. You're going to die alone, childless. All that brilliant potential, such a waste." My mother, Laura Reed, didn't even look up from carefully buttering her roll, a gesture that conveyed 1,000 words of agreement and 0 maternal warmth. She meticulously smoothed the butter, her lack of eye contact more damning than any direct insult. "What a shame." She sighed, the words heavy with performative disappointment, the same tone she used when discussing a broken dishwasher. "Your father and I were hoping to have more grandchildren. Sarah, bless her heart, gave us 2 beautiful boys, James Jr. and David Jr., right away. She prioritized family. But you, Evie, you've always been so difficult, so focused on your career, always chasing that next title. No traditional man wants a woman who's smarter than him and works longer hours. You've scared them all off." My father, David, merely grunted in agreement, adjusting his silk tie and taking a large, greedy bite of the brisket. His silence was always the most crushing verdict. It was the ultimate endorsement of their collective cruelty. They had spent my entire life viewing my ambition as a profound defect, my independence as a failure to conform to their antiquated patriarchal notions of success, and my fabricated single status as a public embarrassment that reflected poorly on their parenting. They always contrasted me with Sarah, the golden child, the woman who married young, popped out 2 boys immediately, and settled into a life of suburban ease and endless performative complaining about the difficulty of maintaining a large SUV and planning a Super Bowl party. They truly believed they had me cornered, that this ritual shaming was just another inevitable part of the holiday season. But what they didn't know was that they were playing tic-tac-toe while I was executing a deeply complex, multi-level global game of 3-dimensional chess. The pieces had been moving for years. A tiny controlled smile touched my lips, one that felt less like a genuine expression of mirth and more like a safety catch being released on a finely tuned weapon. I gently placed my fork down, letting the soft clink on the china resonate in the sudden tense lull of the conversation. I looked directly at Sarah, whose face was already flushed with the smug, nauseating satisfaction of a bully who believed she had just landed the perfect, fatal emotional hit. "That's a lovely sentiment, Sarah. I said, my voice low, steady, and utterly devoid of the old wounded Evie. There was a steely, non-negotiable quality to my tone that made Michael shift uncomfortably in his seat. It must be so profoundly comforting to live a life where your only metric for personal success is a wedding ring and the successful operation of your reproductive organs. Truly a triumph of conformity. Tell me, how's that adjustable rate mortgage payment working out for Michael, now that the interest rates have surged 50% still? Planning on that elaborate 3-week Disney trip this summer? Or did the savings account evaporate with the last quarterly property taxes you two barely managed to pay? I heard your neighborhood HOA fees went up again. Tough break. Sarah's face, usually so composed in its self-importance, tightened, losing its smug luster entirely. Michael visibly flinched, clutching his napkin. He hated when I mentioned their finances. I always hit too close to the bone. My family, you see, was only comfortable when they were collectively dishing out cruelty and judgment. They had absolutely zero tolerance for receiving even the mildest dose of calculated reality or accurate financial insight. That's entirely uncalled for, Evie. Mom snapped, finally looking up, her disapproval sharp and immediate. We are trying to have a pleasant family dinner and you never, ever had any tact. Tact is for people who haven't been relentlessly torn down, condescended to, and financially exploited since childhood, Mom. I replied smoothly, picking up my glass of perfectly chilled iced tea. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the silence stretch into an abyss of my family's sudden acute discomfort. This was the moment I had played 1,000 times in my head. The culmination of 7 years of meticulous planning, financial restructuring, and the hardest secret I had ever maintained. I subtly glanced at my watch, a simple, elegant piece of Swiss engineering, a quiet, powerful statement, a gift from him. The timing, engineered down to the minute, was absolutely perfect. Just as Sarah was gathering her breath, composing herself to launch a fresh, cutting round of attack, probably pivoting to my alleged lack of social life or claiming my apartment was too small for a real family, the massive carved oak doors of the private dining room swung inward with dramatic, powerful, and utterly cinematic force. The sound was a loud, decisive thwack against the wall, silencing the entire room. Every single head at the reed table snapped toward the entrance, their expressions a mixture of annoyance at the interruption and curiosity about the newcomer. And there he stood. Tall, commanding, radiating quiet authority, dressed in a custom-tailored dark suit that probably cost more than Michael's best-performing real estate deal of the last year. His face, instantly recognizable globally from the cover of Forbes' TechCrunch and countless business news headlines, was set in an expression of quiet, almost intimidating resolve. It was Jamie Thompson, the founder and CEO of Aurora AI, a man whose net worth was a number I didn't even bother tracking anymore. A decimal point followed by enough zeros to buy and sell this entire upscale Chicago neighborhood, possibly the whole city block. But Jamie wasn't alone. Clinging to his strong hands, looking perfectly identical in matching navy puffer vests and little denim jeans, were 2 5-year-olds, a boy and a girl, both with Jamie's striking, dark, thick hair and my own distinctively light, determined, piercing blue eyes. Ethan and Olivia. My twins. My family. The reaction was instantaneous, visceral, and utterly wonderfully glorious. My mother's jaw went slack, her butter knife clattering onto the plate, leaving a buttery smear on the pristine white linen. My father blinked rapidly, his usual calculating gaze momentarily shattered, trying desperately to reconcile the imposing figure in the doorway, legitimate titan of American industry, whose company's stock was literally the only reason my father's much-vaunted retirement portfolio wasn't entirely flatlining, with the scorned, dying alone daughter sitting calmly at the table. He was trying to figure out, if he knew this man, how much he was worth and how he could possibly leverage the situation. But the most satisfying reaction, the one I had waited 34 years for, belonged to Sarah. Her self-satisfied expression vanished completely, replaced by a grotesque, gaping astonishment that made her look years older and deeply ridiculous. Her eyes darted frantically from Jamie to me, then to the twins, then back to Jamie, her brain visibly misfiring as it struggled to process the visual proof of my deliberate years-long deception. The sheer cognitive dissonance was a feast for my soul. Jamie's gaze found mine, and the hard lines of his face, the lines of a man who managed thousands of employees and multi-billion-dollar transactions, softened into the familiar, loving smile that always made my heart feel impossibly full and grounded. He and the children crossed the room with an almost regal confidence, the twins' little boots thudding softly and rhythmically on the plush carpet. Ethan, my bold little explorer and the more physical of the two, immediately ran around the table and flung himself into my arms, babbling excitedly about the thrilling private jet ride from Teterboro Airport and the subsequent car ride through downtown Chicago. Mommy-Daddy said we could have extra ice cream after dinner. Did you see the big lake? Olivia, my quiet, observant little strategist and already a deep thinker, walked straight to Jamie's side, holding his hand, and calmly surveyed the stunned faces of my birth family. Evie! Jamie said, his voice deep, resonating and carrying perfectly across the stunned silence of the table. He didn't just greet me, he announced me. He placed a possessive, intimate hand on my shoulder, letting it linger in a way that signaled ownership and deep affection, a level of genuine connection Sarah could only dream of achieving with her constantly bickering, financially stressed husband. I'm sorry we're late. The pilot had a slight delay getting clearance into O'Hare, and the traffic from the private terminal was surprisingly hellish. I hope I haven't ruined the celebration. The subtle inflection on the word celebration was pure, controlled contempt. My mother, having finally recovered from her paralysis, found her voice a high-pitched squeak of disbelief, her composure utterly shattered. Evie, who are these children? And who in God's name is he? She pointed a trembling finger at Jamie completely. Abandoning all pretense of social grace, her focus entirely on the man whose presence promised an unimaginable social and financial elevation I had previously been denied. Mom, Dad, Sarah, Michael. I introduced them with a perfect, innocent, yet utterly lethal smile. This is my husband, James Thompson, but I call him Jamie. And these are our children, Ethan and Olivia. They turn 6 next month. The phrase "my husband," pronounced with clear, deliberate ownership, felt like a powerful physical blow to Sarah, the ultimate delayed punchline to her earlier mockery about dying alone. The fact that the twins were nearly 6 confirmed that I had been married and a mother for almost the entire duration of their relentless judgment. Sarah, choking on her own astonishment and the sheer magnitude of the lie she had accepted, could only manage a strangled, incoherent whisper. But you're not married, you're Evelyn Reed. You said you were single. You always said you were too busy for all this. She trailed off, finally unable to articulate the years of comforting lies and assumptions she had built her superiority upon. The foundation had just crumbled. Jamie stepped forward, taking another step away from the table, his eyes the kind of eyes that could strike fear into venture capitalists and political lobbyists, now fixed chillingly on my sister. The air instantly dropped another 10 degrees, not just from the shock, but from the sudden heavy presence of real, unassailable power. He didn't look angry. He looked supremely, lethally disappointed, which from a man of his stature and reputation was far worse than outright rage. He looked at Sarah's stunned, tacky jewelry, then glanced disdainfully at the entire overly formal Reed table setting, suddenly seeing them all for the small, insignificant provincial people they truly were. He straightened his already perfect suit jacket with a precise, deliberate gesture and delivered the fatal blow, the words echoing in the sudden, complete silence of the elegant dining room. He didn't raise his voice, but the finality and utter conviction in his tone were absolute. She owns this. Sarah's jaw dropped, literally nearly hitting the linen tablecloth. She made a sound like a small, deflating balloon. What did you say, young man? Dad stammered, genuinely confused, now his mind still spinning, trying to calculate Jamie's net worth and the implications of this connection. He thought Jamie meant I was just a shareholder, maybe a passive investor. Jamie didn't look at my father. He didn't even acknowledge the question. He only looked at me, a silent promise and a deep well of love in his eyes before turning back to the group, his delivery calibrated for maximum impact. I said, Evie, my wife, Evelyn Reed Thompson, is the majority controlling owner of this establishment, the Bristol Hotel, all the associated properties, the entire National Hospitality Management Group, the entire portfolio we acquired 6 months ago through Thompson Acquisitions. She insisted on holding the reunion here tonight because, as she put it to me, it's time they were guests in my house, not me having to sit uncomfortably in theirs. She's the silent controlling partner in Thompson Acquisitions, the legal and strategic mind behind 90% of our acquisitions. I'm merely the CEO and the public face who closes the deals. She orchestrates the strategy, especially the legal and financial compliance side, which is, by the way, why she was supposedly confined to a tiny condo in Boston. Not filing paperwork, Sarah. She was finalizing the corporate takeover of your largest competitor's parent company's entire legal portfolio. Last week, a hostile merger that relied on exploiting a tiny compliance loophole she discovered, and she hasn't been single. We've been married for 7 years. We just kept it private from people who might, shall we say, exploit her for access or whose predictable toxic judgment we had zero desire to ever endure. He paused, letting the implication hang heavy and suffocating in the air, a massive, unpayable debt. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a reservation for a private dessert tasting upstairs prepared by the head chef, a tasting that was prearranged by my wife this morning. And I believe my wife has a very important conference call scheduled for 8:00 a.m. sharp tomorrow morning with her legal team regarding a certain family trust. A trust which, Evie, I think you'll find has some extremely fascinating and potentially criminal legal and financial inconsistencies dating back several years. He didn't need to say another word. The 3 words, "she owns this," had shifted the entire tectonic plate of our family dynamic. The girl they had just finished humiliating, the one they called a waste and childless, was not only married to a man of unimaginable wealth and power, but was also the actual power player, the silent architect, the mastermind, and quite literally, their host. The realization that they had just performed their ritualistic public cruelty in a venue that belonged to me, orchestrated by me for the sole purpose of this ultimate humiliating plot twist, was visibly sickening. Sarah looked green, physically ill. Mom looked utterly defeated, not by any moral failure, but by the sheer, crushing, humiliating weight of their colossal miscalculation and their lost opportunity to associate with such wealth. "Let's go, kids," I said softly, my voice now carrying the true, undeniable authority of the moment, the authority of the proprietor. I scooped up Ethan, who happily wrapped his arms around my neck, and offered my hand to Olivia. I gave Sarah and Mom a look that wasn't triumphant, which would have given them too much credit. It was a look utterly devoid of emotion, the cool, dispassionate gaze of a person who has finally moved beyond anger and into calculated finality. "Enjoy the rest of the brisket and the apple pie. It's on the house. Mine, actually. And do try to leave the room as clean as you found it. We have other guests checking in." I slipped my arm through Jamie's, feeling the solid grounding comfort of his presence and the quiet, fierce pride in his look. He gave my entire family a small curt nod, the instantaneous final dismissal of a newly irrelevant annoyance, and together the 4 of us walked out of the private dining room, leaving behind a silence so dense and suffocating it could have permanently erased their ability to speak. That moment changed everything. It was the culmination of a decade of simmering resentment, 4 years of surgical, meticulous financial planning, and a lifetime of being told I wasn't enough. As the door closed behind us, cutting off the vision of their stunned, pathetic, collapsing faces, I felt a release I hadn't known was possible. I hadn't just gotten the last laugh. I had detonated their entire, carefully constructed reality of superiority, but the dinner confrontation was only the elegant, painful prologue. The true core of the revenge, the legal and financial dismantling of their decades-long entitlement, was yet to come. The next morning, I knew exactly what I had to do. I needed to move from a public embarrassment to a total financial and legal victory, ensuring that the legacy of their cruelty was not just a fleeting memory, but a verifiable, court-mandated, and deeply damaging consequence. The retribution had to be as enduring as the damage they inflicted. The path to that moment, to the quiet, unshakable power I now commanded, was paved with years of being the family's perpetual safety net, their reliable, compliant punching bag, and the unacknowledged genius they continuously tried to stifle. I grew up in a beautiful but emotionally frigid colonial-style house in the affluent suburbs of Dallas, Texas, a place where the lawns were perfectly manicured and the emotional neglect was carefully hidden behind a polished mahogany door. My parents, Laura and David, were obsessed with appearances, social mobility, and the meticulously curated illusion of the perfect American family. In their carefully constructed world, Sarah was the perfect trophy child, blonde, bubbly, popular, and pathologically eager to follow the prescribed easy path. A mediocre state school degree, a socialite sorority, an early, strategically sound marriage to a man with good prospects and immediate reproduction. She was the reflection they wanted to see. I, however, was the anomaly, the inconvenient genius. I preferred complex calculus problems to football games, the quiet solitude of the library to the cacophony of the mall, and reading about the history of economic bubbles to planning a homecoming dance. I was the quiet one, the one with the razor-sharp mind for patterns, data, and probabilities. The one who saw the dark, ugly numbers behind the glistening facade of their perfect suburban life. My childhood was a relentless exercise in being told I was too much in all the wrong ways, too studious, too intense, too independent, too analytical. It was never a direct attack, but 1,000 microaggressions. Why can't you just relax, Evie, like your sister? That math scholarship is nice, but who will you talk to at college? You need to work on your social skills. Meanwhile, Sarah was always just right. When I won the state debate championship in high school, beating a team from a notoriously difficult private academy, my mother's only reaction was a dismissive, "That's nice, dear, but Sarah just got asked to prom by a quarterback from a very good family. Focus on what really matters, darling." When I applied for and earned a full scholarship to a top-tier financial program at NYU in New York City, a ticket out my personal equivalent of the American dream, my father told me with startling casualness that I should save my ambition for after I found a good, stable husband to take care of me, thereby implying my intelligence was a temporary hobby, not a serious pursuit. The insult was profound. The constant, low-level emotional sabotage was compounded by real, tangible sacrifices. When Sarah was caught cheating on a crucial history exam that jeopardized her final GPA, I was the one who had to spend my weekends volunteering at a local community center. A public-facing gesture that provided her with the community service hours she needed to maintain her scholarship status, thereby missing the only good study sessions I had for my own AP exams. I was always the designated emotional and logistical fixer, the reliable one whose needs always came second. The sacrifices were small, insidious, and constant, wearing down my sense of self-worth year after cumulative year. The deepest wound came when I was 22, freshly graduated and ready to take on the world. I had secured a dream, highly competitive and prestigious internship at a major corporate litigation firm in Chicago, focused on complex mergers and acquisitions, the perfect high-octane stepping stone for my goal of becoming a forensic financial attorney. This was my hard-earned American dream. The reward for countless hours spent hunched over textbooks and arcane data sheets while everyone else was partying. 2 weeks before I was set to leave for Chicago, Sarah, then a junior in college, ran up a colossal, devastating debt on a shared family credit card. She had been convinced by a smooth-talking, predatory investment seminar leader that she was the next great stock market guru and plunged every penny she could access into a highly volatile, ill-advised penny stock scheme that predictably collapsed. It was a financial disaster. The debt was immense, the compound interest rate crippling, and the whole mess threatened to ruin my parents' carefully constructed credit profile, jeopardizing Dad's final, desperate push toward a coveted senior partnership at his mid-tier Dallas accounting firm. "Evie, please," Mom begged, teary-eyed, standing in the marble foyer, the very embodiment of our family's focus on the external. Her tears weren't for me, but for their tarnished reputation. "You're so smart, so capable. You can get another internship next year. They'll always take you back." Sarah is so emotionally fragile right now. This humiliation would absolutely destroy her. "We need you to use your entire graduation savings, your scholarship reserve, and sign for a high-interest personal loan to pay this off immediately. It has to go away by Monday. We'll pay you back, I promise." The lie hung thick in the air, heavy and inescapable. They knew I was the responsible one, the resilient one, the one who could survive the setback and rebuild my life. I knew with crushing certainty that the promise of repayment was a deliberate fiction. I deferred the internship. I spent the next grueling year working 3 often simultaneous soul-crushing part-time jobs as a Starbucks barista on the early shift, a night shift data entry clerk for a miserable logistics company, and tutoring the spoiled, entitled rich kids of Dallas in advanced placement math and economics, just to service Sarah's debt and keep my parents' elaborate facade intact. I rarely slept more than 4 hours a night, living off adrenaline and bad coffee. They never paid me back a cent. In fact, they quickly filed the whole incident under Evie's bad decisions, attributing my career delay and subsequent exhaustion to my own lack of focus and overly analytical nature that prevented me from adapting. That moment, watching my own shining, hard-won future dimmed and delayed to save my sister's reputation and my parents' credit score, was when the cold, steel-like, unyielding resolve began to form deep in my core. I learned that day with brutal clarity that my family viewed my competence not as a gift to be cherished or celebrated, but purely as an exploitable resource to be used and then discarded without gratitude or compensation. The relationship was further strained and finally broken by the saga of my grandfather, Richard Reed. Grandpa Richard was the only relative who truly saw me, the only one who didn't try to dull my edges. He was a successful self-made man who had made his fortune quietly and shrewdly in Nashville real estate, completely independent of my father's side of the family. He always sent me highly complex, fascinating books on forensic accounting and financial history instead of the generic gift cards Sarah received, and he actively encouraged my forensic mind. He'd call me after my exams just to discuss the intricate details of a difficult problem I'd solved. When I was 27, Grandpa Richard passed away after a long illness. It was a genuine, devastating loss, the severing of my last real family connection, and I flew down to Nashville immediately to attend the funeral. That's when the betrayal escalated from emotional cruelty to outright financial theft. Grandpa Richard had often told me about the specific irreplaceable piece of property he intended for me, a small historic home nestled among the vineyards in Napa Valley, California, that he had purchased decades ago and lovingly restored as a retreat. He also mentioned in explicit detail a significant, substantial, and non-negotiable trust fund, the ER Trust, set up specifically to ensure my complete financial independence and to compensate, in his own words, for what he knew was my difficult, emotionally taxing home life. He wanted me to be free. At the funeral, my parents and Sarah were unusually warm and sickeningly attentive to me, showering me with false concern that should have immediately set off alarms. A few weeks later, my father, David, an accountant, who prided himself on his meticulous, if ethically flexible bookkeeping, called me to his home office in Dallas for the inevitable reading of the will. "Evie, listen," he said, avoiding my eye, nervously shuffling a thick stack of beige, weighty legal documents, the kind that smelled like old money and newly broken promises. The will was simple and quite traditional, as Grandpa Richard was a traditional man. He left the bulk of his estate, the bulk, Evie, to your mother, Sarah, and me, as is customary. You, my dear, received a small cash gift. A token, really. Something to help with your remaining student loans. He always respected your independence, you see, so he didn't want to burden you with complex real estate or intricate assets that would take time away from your career path. He handed me a bank check for $20,000. $20,000. The small historic home in Napa Valley and the substantial irrevocable trust had vanished without a trace, replaced by a paltry, insulting sum that didn't even cover the interest I had paid on Sarah's deferred debt. I knew, with the absolute chilling certainty of a person who understands complex financial structures better than their own father, that this was a complete calculated lie. Grandpa Richard had detailed the ER trust to me only months before he died, outlining the specific tax-advantaged clauses and the trustee appointments. He would never have simply dissolved it into a flat cash check. I took the check, thanked my father calmly, and walked out. The paper felt like a physical slap in the face. But the cold fire of my resolve only intensified. They had taken my opportunity. Now they were trying to steal my entire legacy. This was not a wound to forgive. It was a complex financial crime to be solved and prosecuted. That insulting $20,000 became my secret seed money, my initial investment in justice. I didn't spend a single cent of it on personal items. Instead, I used it to pay for premium, high-level subscriptions to legal probate and financial databases, the kind that only certified professionals could access. My career, though delayed, had taken off significantly. After years of grinding, I had finally landed a job in sophisticated financial compliance in New York City, and my sharp focus on complex cross-border transactional data earned me rapid, quiet promotions. My specialty wasn't just following rules and ticking boxes. It was finding the patterns of malfeasance within the legal framework, the forensic art of following money, where it didn't want to go, tracing illicit transactions across multiple layers of shell companies. I moved from the rigid structure of Wall Street to the dynamic, high-stakes environment of Silicon Valley's legal tech sector, where my specific pattern-finding skills were highly valued and rewarded. I was the person companies hired when they feared the SEC was coming after them, or when they needed to perform a deep, hidden audit of their own internal finances. My discovery of the truth took 3 years of silent, meticulous, and often tedious work, all conducted late at night from my home office after my professional day was done. I started by tracking down the original small-town legal firm Grandpa Richard had used in Nashville. Using my professional compliance credentials and a carefully fabricated plausible cover story about auditing old family trusts for potential conflict of interest, for a major anonymous client, I managed to gain access to historical digital records. It was a high-wire act of ethical ambiguity, walking the line of my professional compliance responsibilities, but I rationalized it immediately. They stole my inheritance and committed fraud. I was simply proving it to restore justice. Deep within a poorly secured cloud server belonging to the now-retired lead attorney, I found it, the original legally executed will, along with all the supporting documentation. It detailed the Evelyn Reed irrevocable trust, valued at $12 million at the time of Grandpa Richard's death, and the specific bequest of the Napa Valley property Vineyard Vista, complete with a specific deed transfer instruction. The documents I had been shown in Dad's Dallas office were not merely a simplified version of the truth. They were a complete, clumsy criminal forgery. The forgery itself was amateurish, which was my father's ultimate arrogant undoing. David Reed had tried to use his own accounting software and a cheap, readily available notary stamp he bought online. He hadn't accounted for the digital trail inherent in modern legal record-keeping. The original signature of the notary, a woman named Mary Jenkins, had a corresponding digital timestamp in the state's official registry for the real document. The notary's signature on the fraudulent document Dad showed me was dated 2 weeks after the notary had formally retired, and more damningly, 3 days after Grandpa Richard's second debilitating stroke, when he was demonstrably and legally incapable of signing anything. The real kicker, though, was the accompanying financial documentation. To facilitate the diversion of the trust funds and the secret sale of the Napa property, which was quickly and secretly flipped to a shell company owned by Sarah's husband Michael for a fraction of its true market value, my family had committed blatant federal tax fraud, claiming the estate was significantly smaller than it was, and using a series of illicit, badly structured offshore transfers to avoid the hefty California inheritance tax and the federal estate tax. Dad, the professional accountant who supposedly specialized in ethical estate planning, had committed the cardinal sin of leaving a detailed, traceable digital trail connecting the fraudulent trust documents directly to his own professional email account and his firm's IP address. He thought his skills as an accountant were enough to cover his tracks. He was wrong. That evidence contained on a single encrypted USB drive that never left my possession was the ultimate turning point. Financial abuse forgery of a will conspiracy to commit fraud and federal tax evasion. It wasn't just personal injury anymore. It was a complex, multi-jurisdictional federal criminal matter. They had messed with the wrong daughter, the one who didn't cry or scream about moral failure, but quietly built a legal case designed to dismantle their lives piece by piece using their own weaknesses against them. During this intense secret investigation, my professional life continued, and that's when I met James Jamie Thompson. It wasn't a whirlwind romance or a fairy tale meeting. It was a high-stakes, deeply intellectual late-night negotiation in a conference room in Palo Alto. I was consulting for a major legal firm, advising them on the complex regulatory compliance risks of a massive corporate merger. Jamie was the CEO, the brilliant, intense, and hyper-focused target of the merger, a man who was widely considered ruthless in business, but who possessed a surprisingly solid core of genuine morality and loyalty. We were on opposite sides of the table, and I spent 3 hours methodically, calmly, and devastatingly tearing apart his company's potential regulatory vulnerabilities with a precision that stunned everyone in the room. He was impressed, not annoyed. He was intrigued. "You have the best mind for defensive compliance and foresight I've ever encountered," he told me the next morning over coffee, a brief professional meeting that quickly bled into a marathon session of talking about data ethics and the future of technology. "You don't just see the rules. You see the crime before the criminal does. You see the pattern in the noise." We started working together almost immediately, initially as client and consultant. Jamie was building Aurora AI, a company that was fundamentally changing how global financial and legal data was analyzed and secured. He was facing monumental legal and compliance hurdles that required my unique forensic pattern-finding expertise. We spent months in the trenches, late nights in glass-walled, open-plan offices in San Francisco, quick dinners ordered from a delivery app, and marathon, adrenaline-fueled sessions fueled by bad coffee and the mutual thrilling and intense respect for each other's intellect. He was the first person who ever saw my analytical mind as a strength, not a burden. The personal connection was inevitable, profound, and swift. Jamie didn't see my ambition as a flaw or a defect. He saw it as an attractive necessity. He didn't want a passive trophy wife. He wanted a powerful, highly competent partner who could hold her own, challenge him intellectually, and secure their shared empire against the inevitable attacks of the business world. When I finally, and hesitantly because the shame was still deep, told him about my family, the exploitation, the systemic cruelty, and the discovery of the devastating financial fraud, he listened intently, his expression growing colder, harder, and more determined with every word. "Evie," he said simply, taking my hands across the table one evening in our favorite low-key San Francisco Italian restaurant. "You don't have to fight this army alone, but you do have to finish it. You must demand justice. Let me help you. My resources aren't for buying them off. They are for ensuring that your evidence is executed flawlessly and permanently within the letter of the law." He wasn't offering a bailout. He was offering the high-grade, impenetrable infrastructure to execute a perfect surgical strike based entirely on my forensic findings. We got married 6 months later in a tiny, quiet ceremony on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Carmel, California, with only 2 witnesses: my closest college friend and now a rising corporate attorney, Linda Chen, and Jamie's longtime business partner, Jack. We agreed instantly my family was to know absolutely nothing. They had lost the privilege of being part of my life years ago. Keeping my marriage and my new status a complete secret was my protection, my personal peace, and the most devastating weapon in my arsenal. 2 years later, Ethan and Olivia arrived, the perfect, unexpected, and overwhelming joy that completed our life, making the concept of dying alone utterly laughable. My parents and sister knew I was still in the Bay Area, still working a big-shot compliance job and maintaining the fiction of the struggling, perpetually single-career woman who was doing just fine, really. Meanwhile, the plan for retribution moved forward with the precision of a Swiss clock. Jamie formally created Thompson Acquisitions, placing me as a silent majority owner and chief legal strategist. He purchased assets that positioned me for maximum targeted impact. The Bristol hotel chain, a portfolio of boutique luxury properties, was one of them. Jamie bought the parent company knowing the Reed family had been holding their annual status-obsessed reunion there for a decade, believing it represented the height of luxury they could barely afford. The irony was palpable. Exquisitely painful, they were to have their final catastrophic public humiliation on my property, in my house. I spent the year leading up to the fateful reunion dinner carefully setting the final trap, dropping breadcrumbs. When Dad called to boast smugly about Sarah's supposed new property investment, the Napa property they had stolen from me now, purchased by Michael's quickly established shell company, I played dumb. "Oh, that sounds lovely, Dad. Real estate is so confusing. I wish I understood the tax implications of those complicated trusts better. You know, sometimes in my work we find those trust conversions are breeding grounds for federal regulatory issues, especially regarding capital gains reporting. Scary stuff." I subtly dropped hints about working on highly sensitive complex tax evasion cases in my job, always watching my father nervously clear his throat on the other end of the line. I knew he was sweating constantly, checking his old paper files. The knowledge that I was a high-level hunter of financial criminals for a living, while being the victim of his own poorly executed financial crime, was a constant low-level torture I enjoyed inflicting. The day after the reunion, back in our sprawling, minimalist penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park in New York City, not the tiny condo in Boston, I claim the mood was electric, filled with a sense of purposeful calm. Jamie was already on a video call with his European division, calmly managing a multi-billion-dollar deal while simultaneously trying to help Ethan find a missing toy plane under the sofa. Olivia was quietly building a magnificent, structurally sound tower of colorful blocks, occasionally glancing at me with her wise, knowing blue eyes. "That was brutal, Evie," Jamie said, clicking the mute button on his phone and turning to me, a glint of steel in his eyes. He still looked impeccably sharp even at 8:00 a.m. "Watching your mother's face when she realized she'd backed the wrong horse and backed it with criminal money was deeply, profoundly satisfying. But the fun, the theatrics are over. Time for the paperwork to be executed." "Exactly," I affirmed, walking to my private home office, which was less office and more a secure, technologically advanced war room built to military specifications. I opened a secure encrypted drive and pulled up a vast hyper-organized file titled read_v_read_final_litigation. The public shaming at the Bristol was necessary for my own mental peace, Jamie. It allowed me to reclaim my narrative. This is for actual permanent justice. We have 3 legal documents to execute today: a formal legal challenge to the probated will filed in Nashville, a civil suit against David and Sarah Reed for conspiracy to commit fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and unjust enrichment filed in Dallas, and most importantly, the sealed, meticulously detailed dossier containing all the hard evidence, the IP trail, the 2 notary signatures, the bank transfer, records, the shell company documents, which goes directly to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the Texas State Bar Association. We have to hit them fast and hard before they can even try to liquidate the stolen assets or move the funds further offshore. Speed is leverage. My primary and most immediate objective was the Napa property, Vineyard Vista. I knew Sarah and Michael had been planning to flip it quickly, capitalizing on the high-end real estate market in Northern California. My legal action needed to stop that sale immediately, placing an immovable federal lien on the property based on the IRS tax fraud claim, which was far harder to fight than a simple drawn-out probate challenge. A civil dispute can be settled. A federal tax audit of this magnitude is existential. "Linda is waiting on the line," I told Jamie, Linda Chen, my college roommate, my matron of honor, and now a sharp, unflappable corporate litigation attorney who worked for Jamie's firm, and was my only true confidant outside of him, was our point person for the litigation. She had meticulously ensured every I was dotted and every T crossed. We held a conference call with Linda and the lead forensic accountant, Jack, who had spent months verifying all the complex illicit money flows. The civil lawsuit for the $12 million trust is ready to be filed in Nashville Probate Court, Evelyn. The documents are time-stamped for 10:00 a.m. EST. Linda reported, her voice clipped, professional and efficient. More importantly, we've filed the lis pendens, the notice of pending action on the Napa property. It's officially locked down. Sarah and Michael cannot sell it. The moment they try, the title company will flag the federal lien based on the initial referral we preemptively sent to the IRS. Excellent, I said, a deep, bone-deep sense of cold satisfaction settling in. Now, Linda, proceed with the IRS referral. That's the real kicker. Dad can try to lawyer his way out of a civil suit. It'll be expensive, but possible. But the IRS criminal audit, especially on the scale of evasion he committed to pull off a $12 million fraud, will bury his professional career, ruin his reputation, and financially cripple them all. He violated his fiduciary responsibility to a degree that is indefensible. My mother called 3 days later, her number coming up as unknown caller, a small detail that showed their panicked state, as they were usually obsessed with displaying their landline number. I almost didn't answer, but I needed to hear the sound of her panic to taste the raw, unadulterated consequence of their actions. "Evie, Evelyn, you need to call off your husband immediately!" She shrieked, her voice tight with uncontrollable hysteria, a pathetic, desperate sound that was a far cry from the composed, condescending matron of the Chicago dinner. "Call him off from what, Mom?" I asked, innocently sitting in my beautiful sun-drenched kitchen, sipping a bespoke perfect latte while watching the twins draw elaborate pictures of spaceships and alien landscapes. "Call him off from what, Mom?" I asked, innocently sitting in my beautiful sun-drenched kitchen, sipping a bespoke perfect latte while watching the twins draw elaborate pictures of spaceships and alien landscapes. This lien, this ridiculous, baseless lawsuit. That property belongs to Sarah and Michael. Now Michael bought it fair and square, and your father's firm, they've frozen his access to his accounts. His company is under audit. The IRS is calling him. They're asking about Grandpa Richard's estate. What did you do, Evie? What did you tell that man? That monster you married? That man, Mom, is my husband, and he operates Thompson Acquisitions. You know, the company that recently bought the entire chain of luxury hotels you loved so much? And I told him the truth, Mom. The whole unvarnished, documented truth, I replied, my voice calm, almost meditative, the picture of serene, deadly control. I told him that David Reed, your beloved husband, forged Grandpa Richard's will, sold off my rightful $12 million inheritance, and committed multiple counts of federal tax evasion to cover it up, using the illicit proceeds to set up Sarah and Michael in their little fraudulent real estate empire. I showed him the documents, the IP logs traced directly back to Dad's office, the 2 notary signatures, and the offshore wire transfers. As a matter of fact, I compiled the entire airtight case file myself. Compliance is my specialty. Remember, it's not just filing paperwork. It's putting white-collar criminals behind bars. And in this case, it's about recovering what was stolen from me and ensuring that those who committed the theft face the proper legal and verifiable consequences within the American legal system. The silence on the other end was absolute and crushing, a void of shattered arrogance. I could hear her ragged breathing. You wouldn't..." She finally whispered, the horror in her voice genuine, because for the first time, she realized her daughter wasn't the weak link or the victim, but the highly competent, ruthlessly efficient executioner. Her world was ending, and I was the architect. "I already did, Mom. The civil papers are filed in Nashville and Dallas demanding the immediate repayment of the trust and restitution for the stolen property, and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division has a copy of your husband's entire digital footprint related to this scheme," I confirmed, letting the finality sink into her soul. You chose Sarah's fragile comfort and the illusion of financial ease over my integrity, my career, and my legacy for 34 years. You mocked my ambition and celebrated my isolation. You tried to erase my inheritance. Now I'm simply reclaiming it with interest and legal consequence. You taught me the rules of this game, money and power. I mastered them. You messed with the wrong daughter, Laura. Game over. I didn't wait for her to respond or plead. I hung up the phone with a decisive click. It was the last time I would ever willingly or legally speak to my mother. The next few months were a blur of intense legal and financial maneuvering, all orchestrated from my secure New York command center. My family, now facing the harsh, unforgiving reality of the American justice system, was scrambling desperately. David Reed was not just audited, he was facing multiple civil penalties and a potential criminal investigation, which forced his resignation from his firm and the permanent loss of his CPA license. The Texas State Bar Association was reviewing his conduct with the severity demanded by a financial felony. Sarah and Michael were forced to hire an expensive, bewildered defense attorney who quickly realized they were defending the utterly indefensible. The Napa property was in complete limbo, a massive debt drain due to the frozen assets, the title lien, and the legal fees. The whole spectacle was delicious and painful in equal measure. Every time Linda called with an update, the judge siding with the ER. Trust on the initial motion, the IRS audit escalating to a formal investigation. Michael defaulting on a loan, it felt like a piece of my stolen past, and my sense of justice was being permanently restored. The deepest layer of the conflict, however, wasn't just the money or the legal win. It was the years of emotional injury that needed to be resolved through this decisive action. This was a story about being seen, about proving my worth not to them, but to the ghost of my younger, exploited, exhausted self. The final mandatory confrontation was scheduled for a high-level mediation hearing in a neutral upscale law office high above the financial district in Boston, the very city I had used as my strategic decoy for years. The setting was meticulously sterile, a long, gleaming mahogany table that looked like a runway water pitchers gleaming under recessed lights, the expansive view of the harbor serving as a detached backdrop to the human drama. On one side, me, impeccably dressed in a custom suit radiating quiet professional authority, seated next to Linda, my legal bulldog who looked ready for war. On the other, Mom and Dad looking utterly haggard, drawn and defeated next to Sarah and Michael, whose forced expensive clothes only made them look more pathetic and out of place, flanked by their bewildered, perpetually stressed defense lawyer, Mr. Harrison. Sarah was pale. Her usual aggressive confidence completely evaporated. The tension was a tangible, thick membrane stretching across the table. David Reed, once the proud, blustering patriarch, was reduced to a hunched, defeated figure who wouldn't meet my gaze. Sarah kept shooting me venomous, confused looks, still unable to reconcile the single, childless waste with the woman who is about to financially and professionally destroy her entire world. Mr. Harrison started with a weak, desperate attempt at an amicable settlement, trying to appeal to a non-existent family bond. Evelyn, we understand your feelings are tremendously hurt. The family is willing to offer you a 50% stake in the Napa property, a gesture of good faith, and an acknowledgement of your grandfather's intent. I chuckled, a low, dismissive sound that bounced sharply off the glass walls. I leaned back slightly, crossing one leg over the other. My feelings, Mr. Harrison. My feelings were hurt when I was 22 and missed a career-defining opportunity to pay off my sister's disastrous gambling debt. My feelings were hurt when my own father, a supposed man of integrity, forged a will and conspired to steal a $12 million trust fund. This is not about hurt feelings which are irrelevant in a court of law. This is about financial fraud, conspiracy to defraud, and documented federal tax evasion. And I'm not interested in a gesture of good faith. I'm interested in the full measure of American justice, restitution, and consequence delivered according to the laws Dad so spectacularly ignored. Linda placed a thick, heavy manila folder in front of Mr. Harrison. The sound of the folder hitting the polished wood was deafening. This is the final counter-offer, or rather the non-negotiable term of settlement to avoid an immediate public and aggressive criminal referral. Evelyn Reed Thompson will take full uncontested possession of the Evelyn Reed Irrevocable Trust, the Vineyard Vista property, and receive full statutory restitution for all legal and opportunity costs. David Reed will sign all documents admitting to the forgery and tax fraud, providing full immediate cooperation with the IRS, which will in exchange for his cooperation potentially limit his prison sentence and certainly his fines. He will be permanently disbarred as a certified public accountant. Sarah and Michael will repay all illicit profits derived from the stolen property sale, and will agree to a permanent, legally enforceable 10-year restraining order forbidding them from contacting my client or her family for any reason. Failure to sign this package of documents within the hour will result in the immediate unsealing of the full criminal dossier and its public release through a major national financial publication simultaneously with a formal criminal complaint by 5 p.m. today. The clock is ticking. The silence that followed was terrifying, absolute. Sarah, unable to contain the crushing reality, finally burst into loud theatrical tears, not of remorse for her actions, but of pure, self-pitying rage at her loss. "You can't do this, Evie. We're family. Where will we live? Who will pay for the boys' private school and their soccer fees? You're stealing our life." My mother, Laura, finally looked me in the eye, and for the first time I saw a flicker of the old, unyielding coldness, not just the new fear. "You are the cruelest, most calculating person I have ever known, Evelyn. You've ruined your own flesh and blood over money." I leaned forward across the mahogany table, my voice a quiet, precise whip that drew everyone's attention. "No, Mom. You did that years ago. I simply chose to stop participating in your lie and your abuse. You taught me explicitly and through your actions that money and power are the only things that truly matter in this family. You taught me that loyalty is worthless and deceit is rewarded, as long as you look good on the surface. You taught me the invaluable asset of being underestimated. You spent my entire life telling me I was a disappointment because I didn't follow your rules. But the truth is, I was simply building a bigger, better set of rules that now apply directly to you, enforced by the full weight of the federal government and my legal team. You valued Sarah's fragile comfort and toxic compliance over my life. Now I value my justice, my integrity, and my future over your comfort. Sign the papers, David. It's the only path that offers you a shred of leniency, and the only way you see your grandchildren again, even if only from a significant legally mandated distance. Dad?" His face crumpled, tears streaming down his face as his life and career evaporated before his eyes reached for the pen. The signature he scrawled was shaky, barely legible, but it was real. It was the signature of absolute, total surrender. He didn't just sign away a property, he signed away his last claim to integrity. The fallout was complete and irreversible. David faced heavy financial penalties, the professional ruin he deserved, and the crushing social shame of a man who betrayed his family for greed. Sarah and Michael lost everything tied to the fraudulent schemes their suburban dream house bought, with the stolen funds now heavily leveraged and on the brink of foreclosure. They became absolute social pariahs in their small appearance-obsessed community, the ultimate consequence in their shallow world. Their attempts to spin the story were immediately shut down by the official court records I ensured were made public. As for me, the victory was deeply satisfying, but the real prize was my rediscovered unassailable self. With the trust fund officially unlocked, the Napa property secured, and the public court-mandated validation of my worth and my accusations, I didn't stop. I took my shot and rebuilt my life on a foundation of true power and moral certainty. The Napa property Vineyard Vista became my occasional sanctuary, not my primary residence, a beautiful, tangible symbol of my grandfather's unwavering love and my own relentless resilience. It was a place of reflection, not bitterness. 9 months after the mediation, I officially launched Veritas Digital, a groundbreaking legal technology and forensic compliance firm based in a sleek glass-fronted skyscraper in downtown Manhattan, New York City, overlooking the harbor. My mission was simple and focused: to use advanced proprietary AI and forensic accounting techniques, the very skills I honed investigating my father, to secure family offices and non-profit endowments against the kind of internal fraud and malfeasance I had personally experienced. Jamie was my biggest supporter, both personally and professionally, investing substantial capital and his global reputation. His connections, combined with my unique proven expertise, quickly made Veritas Digital a market powerhouse. I wasn't just a consultant anymore. I was a CEO, a visionary, a sought-after speaker at global tech conferences, and a leader in a field I was born to dominate. My best friend Linda left Jamie's firm to become Veritas's general counsel, and my indispensable partner, reinforcing the powerful bond built on years of trust and shared struggle. One perfect, crisp, sunny afternoon in October, Linda and I were having lunch on the executive rooftop terrace of my new office building, looking out over the breathtaking expanse of the Manhattan skyline. The air was crisp, the energy of the city pulsed beneath us, and the future felt limitless. "You know, Evie," Linda said, stirring her iced coffee with a reflective smile, "it's incredible. That entire agonizing chapter of your life, the constant emotional abuse, the stolen trust, the years of lying, it all ended up being the crucible that forged this empire. You literally built this billion-dollar company out of their cheap, toxic cruelty." I smiled, a genuine, easy, peaceful smile that didn't feel like a performance or a weapon, but simply the joy of a life lived authentically. "It's funny, isn't it? They spent my entire life trying to make me small, trying to confine me to their pathetic definition of a proper woman, a passive wife, a docile mother, nothing more than a pretty accessory. They thought they were holding me back, but all they did was sharpen my unique skills, harden my resolve, and give me the ultimate case study in white-collar malfeasance. They were my unwitting, deeply expensive business school. They taught me how to find the cracks in the system, how to follow the money into the deepest, darkest corners of the global economy, and how to execute a complex legal strategy without emotional compromise. I paused, looking across the vast cityscape and beyond toward the future. I thought of Ethan and Olivia, happy and thriving, already demonstrating their father's brilliance and my tenacity. I thought of Jamie, my rock, who saw my power and amplified it rather than trying to diminish it. I have everything they said I was wasting: a thriving, world-changing career, a beautiful, unconventional family, and the financial freedom they tried to steal. I concluded, the last vestige of the decades of pain finally gone. But the most important thing I have is peace. I don't have to prove myself to them anymore. I don't even have to think about them. They are a closed chapter, a final successful case file, reduced to the statistics in a legal ledger. The true American dream isn't about fitting into a predetermined mold. It's about tearing down the old structures and building your own damn skyscraper, soaring above the wreckage, brick by forensic brick. My life is the ultimate lean on their legacy. I raised my glass to Linda, to justice, self-ownership, and the last laugh. Linda clinked her glass against mine, the sound sharp and final. To Evie, the one who got away and came back with a vengeance that changed the world. I took a deep breath of the crisp, high-altitude autumn air, feeling the undeniable, absolute power of my own earned success, knowing that I would spend the rest of my life building rather than fighting. My journey had taken me from a lonely, exploited daughter in a fake rich Texas suburb to a CEO standing tall above Manhattan, proving that the greatest revenge is not just winning, but building a life so magnificent and morally sound that the people who doubted and abused you become utterly and permanently irrelevant. I drove home that evening, not to a cramped apartment, but to my family in my city on my own terms, ready to face the world unburdened and stronger than ever before. The depth of the initial betrayal required not just legal recourse, but a total systemic shutdown of the infrastructure my father, David Reed, had relied upon. His greatest mistake was his arrogance, the belief that his certified public accountant CPA license, his shield of professional integrity, made him untouchable. He assumed that a few fudged numbers, a rushed forgery, and a strategically placed offshore account could defeat the relentless precision of a forensic analyst like myself, especially one who had the intimate personal knowledge of his operational weaknesses. His undoing was rooted in specific federal compliance codes, details too mundane for a casual observer, but screaming red flags to a specialist. The transfer of Grandpa Richard's assets was not a single clean transaction. It was a complex series of illegal financial movements designed to minimize tax liabilities that in total constituted multiple felony violations. The core of the tax fraud lay in the misappropriation of the $12 million trust, the Evelyn Reed Irrevocable Trust. This trust, being irrevocable, was meant to shield its assets from estate tax upon Richard Reed's death under specific provisions of the Internal Revenue Code, IRC. David, however, had dissolved the trust improperly and treated the resulting proceeds as part of the residual estate, which he then drastically undervalued on the Form 706 United States Estate and Generation Skipping Transfer tax return. To cover the disappearance of the Napa property Vineyard Vista, he declared a false cost basis and claimed it was a personal loan repayment, not a trust asset. This violated IRC Section 7206 Fraud and False Statements and Section 6663 Imposition of Fraud Penalty Codes, which carry heavy criminal and civil penalties respectively. The transfer of the property itself to Michael's shell company, Sierra Vista Holdings LLC, was a classic self-dealing scheme, a breach of fiduciary duty under state probate law, and a taxable gift that was never reported. The LLC, established in Wyoming with a nominee director to hide Michael's beneficial ownership, was designed for rapid asset flipping, not long-term holding. My software, the predecessor to the Veritas AI, traced the initial capital used to fund Sierra Vista Holdings back through a chain of 3 distinct, poorly capitalized intermediate entities, eventually landing on a personal checking account held by David, which had been illicitly funded by liquidating a portion of the original trust's investments. The digital footprint, the specific browser history, the time-stamped emails setting up the wire transfer, the IP address logging into the offshore banking portal was all captured and cross-referenced. This was the irrefutable data I handed to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. They didn't need to investigate. They just needed to confirm my data structure. The professional annihilation of David Reed was not merely a consequence. It was a meticulously planned legal strategy. The civil lawsuit for the recovery of the $12 million trust was filed in Nashville, the site of the original probate court establishing jurisdiction. The concurrent federal criminal referral, however, was the kinetic energy of the attack. Within 2 weeks of my conference call with Linda, the Texas State Board of Public Accountancy initiated a formal investigation into David Reed's conduct. A CPA's license is predicated on integrity, and the moment David signed the settlement papers admitting to forgery and tax fraud, he provided the state board with the evidence required for summary suspension, followed by permanent revocation. The process was brutally public. David's hearing was held in a small, windowless conference room in Austin, Texas. I did not attend, but Linda provided me with a detailed hour-by-hour account. It wasn't a trial. It was a public execution of his career. The board's lead counsel read aloud the list of violations: the forgery of the will, the use of his professional knowledge to facilitate the illegal sale of a trust asset, and the resulting federal investigation. David, pale and sweaty, tried to offer a pathetic defense, blaming extenuating family circumstances and misinterpretation of complex tax law. His voice was weak, his usual bombastic accountant's confidence utterly gone. The board, composed of 6 seasoned ethical CPAs, listened in cold silence. The chair finally looked at him over his reading glasses and delivered the verdict. Mr. Reed, your actions do not merely constitute a mistake. They constitute a profound, calculated breach of the public trust and the foundational ethics of this profession. You exploited your most privileged knowledge for personal gain at the expense of your own daughter's inheritance. Your license is hereby permanently revoked, effective immediately. You are forbidden from ever referring to yourself as a certified public accountant again in the state of Texas or any other jurisdiction recognizing this revocation. Furthermore, all records of your violation will be made available to the SEC, the PCAOB, and all other regulatory bodies. The CPA license, the single most important symbol of his status and professional identity, was gone, reduced to a legal note in a public file. While David faced professional annihilation, Sarah and Michael's world collapsed into domestic chaos and social ruin. Michael's real estate career, which depended entirely on his perceived financial success and network, was instantly toxic. Once the civil complaint was filed naming him as a co-conspirator in the unjust enrichment and fraudulent transfer of the Napa property, banks ceased doing business with him. His brokerage firm quickly terminated him to avoid legal entanglement. The Sierra Vista Holdings LLC was dissolved by court order, and Michael was forced to personally repay the fractional profits he had skimmed from the property's illicit sale, leaving him with crushing personal debt. The restraining order I insisted upon, the 10-year legally enforceable ban on contact, was the final devastating cut. It wasn't just for my protection, it was to sever the last lingering psychological ties. It meant they couldn't appeal to my emotions, couldn't send me begging emails, and, most crucially, it meant they could never see the twins again. Ethan and Olivia had been born into my power, nurtured in a stable, loving environment, completely insulated from the toxic drama of the Reed side of the family. The family reunion had been the only time they had ever been in the same room as David, Laura, Sarah, or Michael, and that single encounter was now legally mandated to be the last. Sarah's downfall was the most complete because her life was built entirely on appearances. She lost the illusion of wealth, the social superiority she brandished so relentlessly, and the carefully constructed identity of the golden daughter. Her meticulously curated suburban life began to fray. The house bought with funds tied up in the fraud was facing foreclosure. Her friends, who were only loyal to her, perceived wealth and status, quickly dropped her when the IRS liens and civil suit details became public record. Her marriage to Michael, never strong, crumbled under the weight of financial ruin and mutual recrimination. Michael blamed Sarah's need for a Napa investment for encouraging the fraud. Sarah blamed Michael's incompetence for failing to execute the crime cleanly. The divorce was messy, public, and expensive, leaving both financially destitute and socially toxic, the exact mirror opposite of the golden suburban life they had flaunted in my face for years. My own trajectory, meanwhile, continued its ascent, accelerated by the very crisis my family had created. The 3 years I spent forensically mapping David Reed's crime became the intellectual foundation of Veritas Digital. The firm was not just an idea. It was a proven methodology. The core product was the Compliance Pattern Analysis Engine, CPAE, a proprietary AI designed by me and built by Jamie's top engineering talent. CPA didn't just review documents for errors, it identified intentional patterns of malfeasance across vast, unstructured datasets, a capability essential for preventing the kind of systemic fraud I experienced. The AI cross-referenced public records, dark web corporate filings, and global banking protocols to map out shell company structures and predict potential regulatory exposure with unparalleled accuracy. My partnership with Jamie was the ultimate synergy. He provided the technological infrastructure, the engineering muscle, and the capital. I provided the unique legal foresight, the ethical backbone, and the market-proven use case. Our relationship was the antithesis of my parents' shallow marriage of convenience. We were married because we were partners in every sense of the word. Our path to marriage was deliberately slow, built on intellectual challenge and mutual respect, not fireworks or societal expectation. After our initial consulting period, we spent a year purely dating, traveling the world, often discussing the subtle differences between EU GDPR compliance and US SEC regulations over dinner in Paris or Tokyo. Jamie didn't just listen to my career goals. He absorbed them, analyzed them, and helped me scale them. When I first told him about the depth of my family's betrayal, detailing the forgery and the trust, his reaction was not pity, but an immediate, focused resolution to secure justice using the tools of the trade we both respected. They used your greatest strength, your trust and competence as a weapon against you, Evie. Jamie told me one night in our apartment, his arm wrapped tightly around me. We will use your greatest strength, your forensic mind, as a surgical instrument against them. This isn't just about the money. It's about proving that data and truth are more powerful than their petty toxic lies. We'll fight this with absolute clinical integrity. Our wedding was secret because we both understood that their toxicity was not merely an annoyance, but a danger to our stability and our children. We chose 7 years of peace and strategic power over a single day of public performance. The birth of Ethan and Olivia fundamentally altered my perspective, replacing the constant low-grade anxiety of my childhood trauma with the fiercely protective love of a mother. They were the physical embodiment of my triumph over the Reed family's notion of waste. They were born into power, love, and intellectual curiosity. I didn't hide them out of shame. I shielded them out of a deep-seated protective necessity, reserving the privilege of knowing them for those who genuinely loved me, not those who sought to exploit my connection to them. The children were my greatest joy and the ultimate rebuttal to Sarah's cruel mockery. 9 months after the final mediation, Veritas Digital officially launched. My first client was a massive multinational pharmaceutical company dealing with a complex internal fraud scheme, precisely the kind of problem I excelled at solving. My reputation spread like wildfire. I wasn't just a corporate lawyer. I was the one who could find the needle in the trillion-word haystack, the one who turned compliance from a passive requirement into a proactive defensive security measure. Linda, my general counsel, and I often reflected on the sheer staggering irony of my success. Our offices in Manhattan were a testament to my personal quiet revolution. Remember that old battered desk you had in your tiny condo in Boston, where you built this entire case? Linda laughed during a strategy session. Now you're running a company that's disrupting the entire legal industry from a corner office with a better view than the CEO of Goldman Sachs? That desk, I replied, a nostalgic fondness for the struggle coloring my voice, was the most important investment I ever made. It wasn't about the view, Linda. It was about the privacy. It was about creating a sanctuary where I could take their scattered, sloppy crime and transform it into an unassailable data model. David, in his hubris, gave me the template for CPAE. He thought he was too smart for the system. I proved that the system, when armed with superior data and unyielding resolve, is the ultimate judge. The Reed family, now scattered and broken, existed only as a cautionary tale in the legal record and a tax deduction in my accounting system. My mother, Laura, continued her desperate attempts to contact me, sending handwritten letters filled with alternating pleas for forgiveness and venomous blame, occasionally attempting to bypass the restraining order by sending gifts for the children through a third party. Every single letter was cataloged by Linda, deemed non-compliant with the court order, and filed away unopened. The gifts were immediately donated to a local children's charity. They received no response, no closure, just the cold, absolute silence that signifies complete irrelevance. The closure wasn't a moment of explosive triumph. It was a gradual, evolving peace. It was the moment I stopped checking my father's public filings, the moment I realized I hadn't thought about Sarah's status in months, the moment I could look at my reflection and see not the exploited victim, but the architect of my own destiny, a woman who earned her immense power through pure, unadulterated competence and integrity. I had everything I was told I couldn't have, everything they tried to strip away. My revenge wasn't loud or temporary. It was the quiet, enduring success of a life built on solid ethical foundations, a life so full of genuine love and profound purpose that the darkness of my past could never touch it again. I wasn't just healed, I was exponentially stronger. I was Evelyn Reed Thompson, and the world, my world, was finally and completely mine. The true legacy of my family's betrayal wasn't the pain, it was the empire it created. The ultimate revenge wasn't in ruining them, but in surpassing them in every conceivable metric professionally, financially, ethically, and domestically. I had used their attempt to steal $12 million to build a company now valued in the billions, a company dedicated to preventing the exact crime they committed. I was living proof that the most potent form of power is not the wealth you inherit, but the knowledge you acquire and the integrity you refuse to compromise. The lesson was complete, the case file closed, and the new era of my life, an era of uncompromised power and profound purpose, had just begun.